Adam Miller had never been the kind of man who enjoyed attention. Quiet by nature and deliberate in all things, he lived by a simple code. Earn what you have, protect what you build, and don't let anyone mistake your silence for weakness. After years of grueling work repairing and customizing utility trailers, off-grid equipment, and occasionally industrial farming tools, he finally bought his own patch of land at the far end of a suburban development outside Fort Worth, Texas. The place wasn't flashy. A modest house with a steel-roofed workshop and a long gravel driveway that wound between two neglected lots. But to Adam, it was perfect. No shared walls, no barking dogs next door, no forced smiles with strangers who expected him to participate in potlucks or neighborhood game nights. Just space, peace, and control over his own corner of the world. The lot sat technically adjacent to a large planned residential community, but his parcel had been sold off as a separate deal decades before the rest of the development broke ground. His driveway had a different zoning label. His address didn't include the HOA-controlled street suffix. The title was clean. His lawyer had double-checked it before closing. Adam wasn't interested in association newsletters or lawn paint color guidelines, and he sure as hell didn't want anyone dictating what kind of tools he could use in his own shop. That's why he bought here. That's why he paid in full, up front. So no one could tell him what to do. For the first year, no one did. He worked in the shop during the day, welding, fixing, building. Occasionally, neighbors would slow down in their SUVs when passing the corner where his driveway met the edge of the development's sidewalk. Some waved. Most didn't. That was fine with him. The only one who ever actually approached was a woman named Karen Blackwell, the self-proclaimed head of the Community Enhancement Board, a vague term she used in place of the more legally sensitive HOA title. She'd shown up one morning with a clipboard in one hand and an enormous stainless steel travel mug in the other, wearing oversized sunglasses and a tracksuit tight enough to broadcast every ripple of her thick frame. She smiled the way people smile when they're talking to someone they think is beneath them, her tone syrupy and false. "I just wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood," she said brightly, gesturing toward the street with a dramatic sweep. "Most of us are very proud of how we keep things up around here. No clutter, no rust, no unsightly structures. We like everything to feel cohesive." Adam, who had been in the middle of grinding a steel joint, turned off his tool and stepped to the side of the shop door, sweat clinging to his jawline. He stared at her a moment longer than necessary before replying. "I'm not in your neighborhood. This is private property. I checked." Karen's smile flickered but held. Of course. But as a concerned member of the community, I do feel it's my duty to mention that your shop faces the main sidewalk. We just like to make sure that everyone is contributing positively to the street view, for property values." Adam didn't say a word. He just looked at her until she took the hint and stepped back. "Well," she said, shifting her weight, "if you ever want to come to one of our meetings, we'd love your input. We're not just about rules. We're about community." He didn't answer. She left. For a while, things stayed quiet. Adam minded his business, worked, paid his taxes, kept his area clean. He didn't play music late. He didn't burn trash. He even trimmed the cedar trees near the curb when a windstorm knocked a few branches down. He was the kind of neighbor everyone claims to want. Invisible, but dependable. But Karen wasn't content with that. For people like her, power is like air. The less they have, the more they suffocate. So when Adam didn't come to her meetings, when he didn't respond to her gentle suggestions, and when he refused to sign the community compliance acknowledgement form she stuffed in his mailbox, something shifted. First came the anonymous letters, printed, not handwritten, with vague language about property uniformity expectations and aesthetic contributions to communal space. Adam tossed them all in a folder. Then came the friendly visits from other neighbors who just wanted to get a feel for what Adam was building out there. One man, clearly coached, even asked if Adam's driveway had been approved for dual access, whatever that meant. Then came the broken beer bottles along the edge of his gravel. One night, someone egged the side of his workshop. That was when he installed security cameras. Not visible ones. Real ones. Quiet ones. Mounted high under the eaves, motion-activated, infrared-capable. The footage showed a white SUV doing a slow roll down the lane the night of the egging, headlights off. The license plate, blocked by a towel. Adam made a note. Still, he said nothing. He stayed quiet. That was his way. But then, one Monday morning in early May, he returned from picking up a custom steel order from a fabricator across town and found something he didn't expect. A thick, rust-colored industrial chain slung across the entrance to his driveway, padlocked at both ends to two freshly embedded concrete posts. They hadn't been there when he left. And now they were set into the gravel like they'd been poured in days before. Zip-tied to the middle of the chain was a laminated sign that read, "Restricted Access, Community Security Measure." Below that, in red marker, someone had scrawled, "Karen B." He parked his truck across the street and stared. Not with anger, not even with confusion, just cold, mechanical disbelief. He stepped out, crouched next to one of the posts, and ran his hand along the concrete, still faintly dusty, still faintly damp in the center. Whoever installed it had done it quickly, sloppy, but just effective enough. This wasn't some joke. This was deliberate. Adam didn't grab a camera. He didn't call the police. Instead, he walked into his shop, pulled open the heavy tool chest drawer, and retrieved a steel-cutting grinder. 15 minutes later, the chain lay in 4 severed pieces, and the laminated sign had been tossed in a bin labeled scrap. He didn't yell. He didn't even curse. He simply backed his truck down the gravel and parked like he always did, facing the shop, tailgate to the garage, ready for loading. 2 hours later, Karen arrived. Not in person. She wasn't that brave. No. She sent 2 teenage boys from the community volunteer corps, as she called them, wearing neon vests and carrying a clipboard. They didn't say anything. One held up a phone like he was documenting something. Adam just waved as he walked past them with a plasma cutter. The next morning, a new chain had appeared. Thicker, heavier, and this time it had been welded shut, no lock at all. That was when Adam decided, if they wanted escalation, they'd get escalation. But not the kind they expected. No lawsuits, no shouting, just steel, fire, and a level of patience they hadn't accounted for. This wasn't going to be a neighborhood dispute. This was going to be a correction. Adam didn't react right away. That was his instinct, to observe first, let the dust settle, and take the measure of the opponent. He knew that patience was his edge, especially when dealing with people like Karen. So when he found the second chain welded shut and stretched tightly across his own driveway, anchored this time with thicker industrial-grade posts and no visible means of removal, he didn't start cutting immediately. He stood back, noted the adjustments she'd made since the last chain, and calculated the next likely move. She wasn't just reacting anymore, she was planning. This wasn't just an overbearing neighbor trying to make a point. This was someone escalating deliberately, testing boundaries not with emotion, but with confidence. That told Adam one thing. She believed she was untouchable. That kind of belief came from one of 2 places: legal leverage or the illusion of it. The morning air was still cool when he pulled out his phone and called the non-emergency line for the sheriff's office. He wasn't expecting a miracle, just a paper trail. He explained the situation in calm, precise terms. A private property owner blocked from accessing his land by someone who had no title or right to do so. The dispatcher gave him the usual line. A deputy will be out when available. and he hung up, knowing full well they weren't coming any time soon. While he waited, Adam walked back to the house, retrieved his folder of documents, deed, plat map, zoning info, and laid them out on the kitchen table. Everything was in order. The property line had not changed. The driveway was included in the title. There was no right-of-way, no easement, no conditional clause allowing anyone else use or control. He checked it again, just to be certain. Then he scanned the documents into a PDF and emailed them to his lawyer, along with a brief summary of what had occurred over the last 3 weeks. His lawyer, Mark Renshaw, was a quiet man in his late 50s with a knack for finding loopholes. Mark called back that afternoon, after reviewing the documents and the pictures Adam had taken of the welded chain. "She's overstepping," Mark said. "Legally, this is your property. What she's doing is trespass, obstruction of access, and potentially malicious damage if she touched your gravel. I can draft a formal cease and desist, but I recommend documenting everything in writing, and don't cut that chain just yet. Let her sit with it." Adam agreed. He didn't like giving someone like Karen even a moment to feel like she'd won. But Mark was right. The smarter move was to show restraint, let her believe she'd cornered him, then bring the consequences down like a sledgehammer. The deputy finally arrived around 5:30, a younger guy named Ortega. He was polite, but guarded. As Adam walked him out to the driveway and explained the situation, Ortega glanced around, made notes, but never stopped looking over his shoulder, like he expected someone to be watching. "You've got all your documents, right?" Ortega asked. Adam nodded and handed him the folder. The deputy flipped through, whistling under his breath. "All right, I'll write this up. It's a civil issue right now, but I'll document the obstruction. If it escalates, or if she damages anything else, call us." "And if I remove it?" Adam asked, eyeing the chain. Ortega hesitated, then said quietly, "Technically, you can. It's your land. But if you do, take pictures, be smart, and make sure you don't touch anything outside your line. She'll be looking for any excuse to call this retaliation." That night, Adam didn't cut the chain. He didn't weld anything. He didn't even touch the posts. He just parked on the street, locked his truck, and went inside. He knew Karen was watching. He knew she expected him to react, loudly, angrily, like the kind of man she thought she understood. That's where people like her always made their mistake. They believed control was about noise. Adam knew better. Real control was quiet. The next morning, he received a letter. It wasn't from Karen directly, but from a company called Golden Horizon Property Services, a local outfit with a bland logo and a Fort Worth mailing address. The letterhead was professional. The tone cold. Subject: Notification of violation. Unauthorized entry and structure conflict. The body of the letter accused Adam of inappropriate land use and claimed that his driveway interfered with the regulated design of adjacent lots. It further stated that, due to recent concerns expressed by multiple residents, access to the area had been temporarily suspended pending compliance inspection. No signatures, no reference to any law, just a printed name. Karen Blackwell, District Liaison. Adam stared at the paper for a long time before placing it in the folder. This was her next move: corporate shields and vague threats. He recognized the tactic: create confusion, bury the truth under paperwork, and wear the opponent down by sheer volume of hassle. It didn't matter that none of it was enforceable. Most people folded long before the truth ever came out. But Adam didn't fold. He made copies of everything. He logged every contact. He even created a new email address specifically for dealing with the paper trail. The goal wasn't just to defend his land. It was to leave a record so airtight it would embarrass anyone who tried to challenge it. Meanwhile, Karen kept turning the screws. By the end of the week, Adam received 2 more letters, one claiming his workshop was generating excessive noise, and another citing visual pollution. Each was unsigned. Each came in a plain, white envelope. Each carried the same veiled language of control. Still, Adam didn't respond. Not publicly. Privately, he called a licensed land surveyor. "Can you confirm my boundary lines?" he asked. "Sure," the man replied. "That's basic." "Good. I want a full report, documented, certified." It took 3 days. The survey confirmed what Adam already knew. The chain, the posts, and even part of the sidewalk Karen had recently extended into his gravel were all on his property. When the report arrived, Adam didn't wave it around. He sent a copy to Mark, filed one at the county office, and kept the original locked in a fireproof safe. Now, he had everything he needed. On Friday, he called a local welder he knew from an old job site and asked for a favor. "Can you bring your truck tomorrow?" Adam asked. "I've got a piece of scrap that needs rehoming." "Sure," the welder laughed. "What are we moving?" "About 20 feet of misjudgment," Adam said and hung up. He still hadn't touched the chain, but he would, on his terms, when the timing made sense. And when he was ready to send a message, it wouldn't be loud. It would be permanent. Saturday morning arrived without any surprises. The chain was still there, taut and heavy, its orange-brown links catching the early light like a wound that refused to heal. The posts anchoring it had hardened completely now, no longer damp at the base. Someone had even spray-painted the base with a matte gray to blend in with the gravel. It was an attempt to make the installation look legitimate, as if it had always been there. But Adam had the survey, the time-stamped photos, the footage from his cameras, and the signed affidavit from the contractor who'd installed his driveway years ago. The truth didn't need camouflage. The welder showed up around 10. His name was Roy. Big man, bald, with tattoos from the neck down and a welding truck outfitted like a mobile forge. Adam didn't bother giving the full story, just the boundaries, the plan, and the confirmation that everything they were about to touch was legally his. Roy laughed when he saw the chain. "She really welded this?" he asked, squatting to inspect the seam. "Yeah," Adam said, holding up a printout of the survey. "And she's about to get it back." They didn't cut it. That would have been too easy. Instead, Roy pulled out a thermal lance, a specialized tool used to slice steel like butter. Loud, violent, and impossible to ignore. The moment it touched the weld, sparks screamed through the air. The seam split like a peeled zipper. The chain dropped limp across the gravel, hissing smoke. Roy grabbed a set of pliers and started coiling it like a snake, dragging it toward the truck. Adam followed behind, gathering the links like trophies. No shouting, no ceremony. Just steel, sweat, and purpose. But the finale was deliberate. Roy backed his truck up next to the old Chevy Suburban that Karen always parked 2 feet over the line on weekends, right up against Adam's property, daring someone to key it. Adam held up the padlock she'd used on the original chain and nodded. They didn't just drape the chain over the bumper, they welded it. 2 clean spots on the Suburban's rear frame, right where the tow hook should have been. A few tacks with a MIG welder and the chain was fixed, not to the body but to the steel. Just secure enough to be painful. Just symbolic enough to be undeniable. Adam printed a laminated sign, zip-tied it through one of the links, and left it hanging. Private property returned to sender. Do not remove without permit. Then they left. No calls, no confrontation. The neighborhood erupted by afternoon. First came the screeching sound of the Suburban trying to back up, the chain clanking taut against the post Karen hadn't removed. Then came the yelling, loud and high-pitched, Karen's voice echoing off the vinyl siding of her carefully painted home. She didn't come to Adam's door. She didn't even call the police. Not at first. She stormed around in her driveway, phone glued to her face, pacing like a general whose war had turned against her. Adam, inside, ate a sandwich and reviewed security footage. It took less than 20 minutes for the first patrol car to arrive. 2 officers, both older, both tired. Karen came at them in a flurry. Gestures, rapid words, fake tears. The officers listened. Then one of them walked up to Adam's door and knocked. Adam opened it, calm, collected, folder already in hand. "Sir, your neighbor claims you've damaged her vehicle," the officer said, flat. Adam handed over the survey report, time-stamped video stills of the chain being installed on his property, the cease and desist letter from his attorney, and the photos of Karen's car repeatedly parked on his gravel. "I returned her property," Adam said, "to her vehicle, on my land." The officer looked at the documents for a long time, then stepped aside to speak with his partner. Karen kept yelling behind them something about mental instability and community safety. Eventually, the officers came back, handed Adam his documents, and gave him a look that said more than their words ever could. "We recommend you both pursue civil remedies," one said. "We're not getting involved in what looks like a property dispute." Karen's face turned crimson. She opened her mouth, but the officers didn't wait. They got in their car and left. That night, Adam sat on his porch. It wasn't victory, he felt. Not exactly. It was a reset, a recalibration. The message had been delivered. Escalation would not go unanswered. But he knew Karen wouldn't stop. She couldn't. People like her didn't understand lines until they were physically drawn. And even then, they scratched at them like animals testing a fence. The next morning, Adam's mail didn't arrive. Not just late, completely absent. He walked down to the box around 4, still empty. The following day, same thing. On the 3rd day, he called the post office. They confirmed that mail delivery had been suspended due to an unresolved access dispute reported by a community official. The name wasn't given, but Adam didn't need it. He called the regional office, submitted his documentation, and within 48 hours, mail resumed. But when the carrier dropped off his bundle that Thursday, she handed it to him with an apologetic frown. "Someone said you had blocked public access to the mailbox," she said. "We're not supposed to deliver if there's a hazard." "Hazard?" Adam asked. She looked away. "A chain across the driveway. Report said it was permanent." "Took pictures." Adam nodded and thanked her. The chain had been gone for nearly a week by then. Inside the mail bundle were 3 letters from different departments: zoning compliance, fire access, and environmental review, all from Karen's camp, each referencing anonymous tips about violations on his property. None of them substantial, all of them distractions. He didn't panic. He documented, responded, and looped in Mark, who now had a file over an inch thick on his desk. Mark's tone on the phone had shifted, from professional to something colder. "She's baiting you," he said. "Don't give her the reaction she wants, but start preparing for mediation. She's laying the groundwork for a claim." By the weekend, Adam's driveway was clear. The Suburban hadn't returned. Karen had retreated behind her curtains, but the air was heavy, expectant. The silence before the next move. He could feel it. That slow, grinding pressure of someone planning something they thought would be irreversible. And when it came, Adam knew it wouldn't be chains or cars. It would be something quieter, something official, something worse. Weeks passed with no more chain, no more direct confrontations, and not a single word from Karen. On the surface, the silence seemed like surrender, but Adam knew better. She wasn't finished. She was recalibrating. It was the pause that came before the next kind of move. One that would be colder, more methodical, wrapped in paperwork and bureaucracy. Karen had already tested confrontation and intimidation. Now she would turn to the institutions she believed she controlled. trying to weaponize structure against someone who never asked to be part of it in the first place. Adam stayed alert, documented everything, and prepared for a shift in terrain. Then a man arrived at his door with a clipboard and a carefully neutral expression. He didn't identify himself with any agency, just said he was conducting routine accessibility checks for residential improvements. He used vague language, avoided anything that sounded official, and asked carefully layered questions that hinted at fault. Was the drainage system adjacent to the driveway altered in the past year? Were any business-related materials stored within view of the street? Had Adam filed for a perimeter compliance update? Each question was delivered like a courtesy but carried the weight of an accusation. Adam didn't argue. He simply asked for a badge or written authorization. The man deflected, mumbled something about community liaison approval, and left behind a slip of paper marked Compliance Review Pending. There was no seal, no department letterhead, just an acronym Adam didn't recognize. He placed the slip into his file and immediately contacted the county zoning department. There were no open reviews, no complaints officially filed. The man had been a plant, likely someone Karen paid or convinced to play inspector in hopes of catching Adam off balance. That tactic didn't work either. A few days later, another escalation came, this time through a third-party paving contractor. They arrived without notice, flagged the boundary between Adam's gravel and the neighborhood sidewalk, and prepared to resurface what they called a shared easement. Adam intercepted the crew before they could unload their grinders. The foreman explained that they were acting on a private work order, no municipal backing, no public works involvement. Adam showed him the certified land survey, pointed to the boundary markers, and asked if the name on the order happened to be K. Blackwell. The foreman didn't answer, but his smirk did. They packed up within minutes and left without incident. It was clear now. Karen had shifted from open conflict to systemic erosion, filing phantom complaints, sending fake officials, hiring contractors to probe for weakness. She wanted to wear Adam down, not defeat him in court but bury him in small battles until he gave up the land or made a legal mistake she could leverage. She wasn't fighting fair. She was fighting strategically, as someone used to bending the rules instead of following them. Adam responded like an engineer under siege. He logged every contact, scanned every document, backed up all footage, and cross-referenced county records. When a copy of his property file arrived from the assessor's office, it included 2 recent anonymous complaints, one accusing his workshop of being an unlicensed business, the other citing excessive mechanical traffic, degrading neighborhood value. The wording was familiar. Karen had used the same phrases during their first conversation, almost verbatim. He couldn't prove she wrote them, but she'd either done it herself or orchestrated it through someone she trusted. He brought the file to his lawyer, who examined the paperwork and delivered a dry but definitive opinion. Karen wasn't aiming for a lawsuit. She was laying the groundwork for nuisance proceedings, a multi-stage campaign to have Adam's property reclassified or absorbed under a broader zoning change. It was rare, expensive, and unlikely to succeed, but if it gained traction, it would bleed Adam in filings, inspections, and administrative hearings for months. Her goal wasn't to win anything concrete. Her goal was to make it cost too much for him to stay. Adam doubled down on documentation. He sent certified letters to each department involved, confirming his standing, rebutting each complaint point by point with photos, reports, and legal references. He requested copies of any action plans related to his parcel. Then he installed a second layer of security, low-level infrared sensors beneath the gravel, recording any sustained presence near the edge of his property. It was quiet, legal, and invisible. If Karen or anyone acting on her behalf returned, he'd have timestamps. Shortly after that, a new provocation arrived, a formal printed invitation, this time delivered in an envelope embossed with gold trim. The wording was theatrical and absurd. You are cordially invited to participate in a discussion on community integration and long-term harmony, hosted by Karen Blackwell at her residence. Refreshments provided. The tone was sugary, the message condescending, and the real intent obvious. It wasn't an invitation, it was bait. Karen wanted Adam to show up and lose his temper in front of witnesses, wanted to provoke a display she could use to frame him as unstable or aggressive. She was setting a trap wrapped in social etiquette, trying to lure him into a room where she controlled the narrative. Adam didn't bite. He didn't RSVP, didn't show up. Instead, he framed the invitation between steel plates, welded the edges, and hung it in the workshop above his cutting table. A quiet reminder of the kind of games she played, and the kind of resolve she was up against. That night, he stood in the dark near the edge of his drive and listened to the silence. The kind of silence that wasn't calm, but coiled. Nothing had happened yet. But something was coming. And the next step wouldn't be indirect. It would be sharp, sudden, and calculated to break him. He wasn't going to let it. The storm began not with noise, but with paper. A courier arrived at Adam's gate with a clipboard and a neutral expression, delivering a thick envelope marked Notice of Determination, Regional Oversight Board. The document inside wasn't a lawsuit. It wasn't even a formal violation. It was a petition, a cleverly worded proposal submitted by a collective of concerned neighbors, requesting a review of Adam's property for potential reclassification under a new local zoning provision. The language was vague but deliberate. It suggested that his driveway and shop created irregular flow, commercial exposure, and unregulated activity inconsistent with residential harmony. None of it was criminal, none of it provable, but it was enough to trigger a municipal review. The date was already set. The reviewers were already assigned. Karen had made her next move and she hadn't wasted time. Adam read through the papers without expression, noting the phrasing, the timing, and most of all the absence of any direct accusation. It was like trying to fight fog. You couldn't punch it, couldn't grab it, you could only try to outlast it. He immediately sent the full packet to Mark, who confirmed what Adam already knew. This wasn't about law, it was about attrition. The board wasn't empowered to enforce anything, yet, but their recommendation could be used as justification for further restrictions. If Adam didn't attend the hearing, if he didn't respond formally, the assumption would be passive guilt. The trap was procedural. Miss a deadline, fail to file a reply, and she could paint it as non-compliance. It was the slowest, dirtiest form of legal warfare, and it worked only because most people didn't see it coming. Adam replied with precision. He submitted a notarized rebuttal complete with survey records, zoning certificates, and an affidavit from a third-party civil engineer affirming the use of his land as within the intended zoning at the time of purchase. He didn't threaten, didn't plead. He responded like a landowner defending a boundary, clearly, surgically, without emotion. But even as the paperwork moved forward, the attacks around him escalated. One morning, he found 2 of his driveway cameras torn from their mounts, wires clipped, lenses cracked. It wasn't vandalism, it was too specific. Whoever did it knew exactly what to disable. He checked the recordings. The feeds cut out at the same moment and the motion sensor logs went dead. They hadn't just been ripped out, they'd been killed professionally. He replaced them that day with embedded units disguised as gravel markers, wired into a separate battery system stored in a locked utility box. A few days later, a pile of scrap metal appeared just inside his property line. Rusted beams, broken bolts, half of a twisted aluminum frame, dumped overnight. No note, no sign of who had delivered it. Adam photographed the pile, recorded the exact GPS point on the survey, and filed an illegal dumping complaint. He wasn't cleaning it. Let the city see what people like Karen brought into the neighborhood. But it didn't stop there. More cars began to idle along the street in the evenings. Unmarked sedans, trucks without plates, sometimes parking across the mouth of his driveway for minutes at a time before rolling off silently. No one approached, no one spoke. They just observed, watched, and moved on. It was psychological pressure, the kind of passive stalking that couldn't be proven, only endured. Adam responded with silence. He altered his routines, shifting work hours, parking deeper in the shop, never entering or exiting at the same time 2 days in a row. He created uncertainty for those trying to monitor him. If they wanted patterns, he'd give them noise. He reinforced his perimeter with no trespassing signs, registered cameras with law enforcement, and quietly installed a buried magnetic field detector under the front quarter of his drive. No one would approach on foot without him knowing. Then came the first fire inspection. A white pickup pulled in, lights flashing low, with a man in city uniform stepping out holding a clipboard and a small fire extinguisher strapped to his belt. At Reese, he claimed an anonymous tip had reported flammable materials stored within a flammable structure. Adam asked for ID. The man produced a badge. It was real. The inspection, it turned out, was legitimate, triggered by a call logged through the county's public hazard line. Adam let him inspect the shop, knowing full well everything was stored properly and up to code. The inspector left without issue but warned that any follow-up complaint could trigger a full fire marshal audit. It was a subtle message. Karen had moved beyond fake officials. Now she was activating real departments with fake data. That night, Adam received a text from Roy, the welder who had helped him with the chain. It was just a photo. A flyer posted at a local gas station bulletin board. A low-resolution picture of Adam's shop with the words, "Unlicensed Commercial Zone, Community Hazard," printed in bold, black letters. No contact number, no author. Just a public smear campaign posted where people who didn't know better might take it seriously. Adam drove out there and tore the flyer down. The paper was freshly stapled, the ink not fully cured. He sent the photo to Mark. "They're trying to provoke me into a public meltdown," he wrote. Mark's reply was short. "Don't give them one. Stay in your lane. Keep building your file." So Adam did, but Karen wasn't done. The final move came through the electric company. Without notice, Adam's property experienced a shutoff. Not a blackout. A targeted disconnect. His breakers were fine, but the feed line had been disabled at the street box. When he called the utility, they explained the request had been processed as a voluntary, temporary interruption due to structural upgrades. The request had been filed online. The email used was unfamiliar, but the name attached was A. Miller. Fraud, impersonation, theft of service. Adam filed a formal investigation request and demanded a forensic trace of the order. It would take weeks. Meanwhile, he ran his property off generator power, burning through fuel and money just to keep his systems online. He knew what this was now. It wasn't harassment. It wasn't a feud. It was siege warfare. She wasn't attacking him. She was isolating him, draining his time, money, energy, waiting for him to make one rash move she could escalate into a real case. Karen wasn't winning in court or in public, but she was patient. She could afford to chip away at him indefinitely. Most people broke under that kind of weight. But Adam wasn't most people. He dug deeper. Hired a private investigator through a contact Mark recommended. Gave him one job. Background on Karen's community dealings, her contracts, her signatures. He didn't want dirt. He wanted patterns, evidence of abusive process, repeat behavior, even just one traceable incident that crossed the line from administrative bullying into actual malfeasance. As he waited for the results, Adam kept his house dark and his shop quiet. No lights on the outside. No activity before dawn. The property seemed abandoned, dormant. From the street, it looked like Karen had won. Her target finally defeated, his land silenced. But that was the point. Because in the dark, Adam wasn't backing down. He was setting the stage, and when the next hit came, it wouldn't land on him. It would come back the other way, harder, sharper, and this time it wouldn't be quiet. The call from the private investigator came late in the day, but Adam had been expecting it. He wasn't sure what he'd hear. He hadn't asked for scandal or secrets, just facts. A pattern, something he could hold in his hands and lay on a table in front of a judge, or, better yet, a city official who still believed in boundaries and law. What he received was far better than expected. Karen Blackwell, it turned out, had a long and creatively documented history of community involvement, most of it cloaked in procedural opacity. She'd served as chair on 3 different neighborhood boards over the past 10 years, each one marked by a similar trend. Slow accumulation of control, weaponized regulation, anonymous complaints targeting dissenters, and, most interesting of all, financial overlap between vendors she recommended and shell companies tied to her cousin, her former real estate partner, and once even herself under a maiden name LLC. None of it was flashy, none of it would make the front page, but all of it, stitched together, formed a clear line of abuse. She didn't just like power, she profited from it. And in one case, several years prior, she had forced a property into foreclosure through a multi-step campaign of nuisance filings, then acquired it through an investment partner 6 weeks later at 1/3 of its value. Adam didn't need to speculate. The documents were all public. The investigator simply connected the dots. With this information in hand, Adam met with Mark in person. They laid out everything. The zoning manipulation, the chain, the fake inspector, the illegal utility shutoff, and now the pattern of behavior that stretched years beyond Adam's conflict. Mark didn't blink. He just nodded and began assembling a formal complaint to the State Attorney General's office for targeted harassment and abuse of municipal process. But even before the paperwork could be filed, Adam made one more move. He drove to the County Land Records Office and submitted a formal boundary clarification request. Nothing aggressive, nothing accusatory. Just a map. A marker. A request for official acknowledgement that his land began where the gravel started. Not 1 inch further, not 1 inch less. The staff processed it like any other document. But that clarification, when published, would invalidate every easement complaint Karen had filed. It would also bring scrutiny to how those complaints were accepted in the first place. Then, as if on cue, Karen made her mistake. A letter arrived, not from her hand but on official letterhead from the Community Planning Liaison Council, a body Adam had never heard of. The wording was thinly veiled legalese, threatening permanent encroachment sanctions, and a cease directive for public hazard mitigation. Adam read it twice, then checked the sender. It wasn't the county. It wasn't the city. It was a nonprofit registered by Karen herself the previous year with a P.O. box in her name. She had invented a council, printed documents, and used them to intimidate neighbors. Not just Adam, but likely others who had folded before. Adam didn't wait. He brought the letter, the investigator's file, and a sworn affidavit to the City Planning Commission. He didn't demand enforcement. He asked for review, quietly, calmly, legally. The city opened an inquiry, not because of the content, but because of the volume. Too many filings, too many questionable signatures, too many boards and councils with no paper trail. Karen, in her attempt to appear official, had gone one step too far. She had left fingerprints. The next week was a slow boil. Karen stopped leaving her house. Her Suburban sat unmoved. Flyers disappeared. No more inspectors arrived. But Adam knew that silence too well now. It wasn't retreat. It was desperation. Then came the breaking point. In the early morning, Adam heard the unmistakable grind of concrete being torn. He stepped outside, quietly, and saw a crew working at the edge of his property, digging into the curb. A backhoe, 2 workers, and a woman in an orange vest barking instructions. It wasn't a city crew. Their truck bore no emblem, no markings. Adam stood in the gravel and asked who authorized the work. The woman didn't answer. One of the workers hesitated, said they were redoing a drainage adjustment per homeowner request. When Adam asked which homeowner, the woman finally turned. And it wasn't a stranger. It was Karen's niece, the one he'd seen once at a barbecue months earlier, smiling under the same smug arc as her aunt. Adam didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He walked back inside, called the city, and reported unauthorized construction on public infrastructure. Then he walked into the shop and waited. 23 minutes later, a city inspector arrived with a police officer. Adam said nothing, simply pointed. The officer spoke with the workers, who quickly shut down the equipment. Karen's niece made a scene, yelled about favoritism, about abuse, about corruption. But the officer didn't blink. He checked the city permit system, found nothing, and called for vehicle removal. The crew left. Karen's niece drove away in silence, but Adam had captured everything on video: license plates, names, timestamps, and equipment identifiers. Later that day, Adam delivered the footage to the Planning Commission. Not for revenge, not for spectacle, but as documentation. Karen had gone from manipulation to illegal activity, and this time it was in plain view. She hadn't just broken ethics. She'd violated permits, endangered infrastructure, and attempted to forcibly alter a boundary. Within 48 hours, an official investigation was launched. Not internal, not civil, criminal, fraud, misuse of public process, coercion. The investigator's report was handed off to a prosecutor. Karen was served at home, and for the first time since Adam had met her, she had nothing to say. But Adam didn't celebrate. He didn't smile. He didn't call Roy or crack a beer. He simply stood in his shop, cleaned his tools, and went back to work. The road outside was quiet now. No Suburban, no chain, no phantom inspectors or unmarked trucks. Just gravel, sky, and steel. He hadn't won. He'd simply endured long enough to outlast someone who thought power came from fake titles and forged documents. In the end, she'd built her own cage. All Adam did was shut the door. The silence that settled over the neighborhood in the weeks following the investigation wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, uncomfortable, like the stillness after a house fire when the embers are cooling but the damage remains in full view. Karen's house, once a revolving door of cars, deliveries, visitors, and volunteers, became dormant. The Suburban was gone. No signs, no meetings, no circulars. Curtains remained drawn day and night. People whispered, speculated, passed glances instead of greetings. It wasn't fear. It was the slow realization that for years they'd tolerated a person who had never truly represented them, only manipulated the structure around them until she was the loudest and most powerful voice by sheer force of attrition. Adam didn't speak to anyone about it. He didn't explain what had happened or take credit. He simply resumed his work. With no more surprise inspections, no more chain, no more letters, the property returned to its original rhythm. Sparks flying behind closed workshop doors, engines turning over at odd hours, metal bent and shaped into purpose. He reinstalled the original driveway markers that Karen had tried to erase. Not flashy ones, just clean metal posts with a single etched plate that read, "Boundary confirmed by county record, no public easement." A statement not of defiance, but of fact. It was the kind of sign no one questioned anymore. In the background, the case against Karen slowly unfolded. The charges were bureaucratic in nature. misuse of municipal procedures, falsified correspondence, unauthorized filings, but they carried weight, and the investigators were thorough. Adam wasn't the only one who had been targeted. Quietly, over the course of a few months, other property owners came forward, their stories echoing his. False warnings, retaliatory citations, unexplained work orders appearing out of nowhere. Each new voice added to the picture until it was no longer about one man and his driveway. It was about a pattern of control that had finally collapsed under the weight of its own arrogance. Eventually, Karen was removed from her positions, not with fanfare or dramatic headlines, but with a dry administrative statement and a legal bar from holding any future community office. Her nonprofit was dissolved. The name Community Planning Liaison Council was formally flagged in county records as illegitimate. The property she lived on was put up for sale under a different name 6 weeks later, and rumors swirled that she had moved to stay with family out of state. No one missed her. No one asked questions. It was as if the ground had shifted and finally covered the hole she had left behind. For Adam, the resolution wasn't emotional. It didn't come with satisfaction or revenge. It came in small, practical moments. The mail arriving without delay, city trucks passing without slowing to photograph, the absence of late-night idling vehicles. It came with a full morning of uninterrupted welding, a walk to the edge of his property without the feeling of eyes on his back. He didn't measure the win by what he'd done to her, but by what he no longer had to do. No more recording, no more logging threats, no more defending what had never been in dispute. He reclaimed his space not through conquest, but through preservation. One afternoon, weeks after the dust had settled, Adam received a handwritten note in his mailbox. It wasn't from Karen, and it wasn't from anyone official. It was from a neighbor, unsigned but sincere, thanking him. Not for being loud, not for fighting, but for holding the line. It was short, just 2 sentences. You reminded us this wasn't normal. Some of us were too tired to say it out loud. Adam read it twice, folded it, and slid it between the pages of his original deed paperwork, the one with the stamped map and the surveyor's ink still crisp in the corner. He didn't need recognition, but something about the note felt more real than all the signatures, filings, and resolutions that had come before it. Life moved forward. The shop stayed busy. Adam took on more custom work, small commissions from people outside the neighborhood, people who didn't know or care what had happened on that narrow stretch of gravel behind the chain. The story faded from casual conversation. The boundaries remained intact. Occasionally, someone new would drive by slowly, take in the clean lines, the neat rows of material, the understated fence posts. They'd glance at the sign, at the camera lens tucked just under the eaves, and they'd keep moving. But Adam knew the story wasn't really about chains or fences. It was about pressure. What it does, what it reveals, how long a person can endure before pushing back. He hadn't sought confrontation, hadn't wanted to be the example. But when the pressure came, he met it not with violence or rage, but with patience, record-keeping, and an iron spine. He didn't break. He didn't bend. And in doing so, he made room for the next person who found themselves on the wrong end of the same fight. The wind shifted across the gravel, stirring dust in small clouds that danced for a moment before settling again. Adam stood in the shadow of his workshop, arms crossed, watching the stillness like it was something earned. It was.